This is Earth Movers
with Alison Mariella Désir, Stephanie Flippin, and Verna Nesbegay Volker.
A trail podcast reclaiming the narrative.
Hey everyone, welcome to Earth Movers. This is your co-host Alison Mariella Désir, and I am super excited because I will be speaking to Katy Farrell of Rainshadow Running today. But before I get started, I want to thank our sponsor, Ultra. Ultra is back for season 2, and we are loving it. I have actually been training in a pair of Ultras these past couple of months, and it's been fantastic. If you want to find out more about ultra running, you can head to ultrarunning.com. That's ultra, A-L-T-R-A running.com. Another exciting bit of news is that we are now on Substack. You can officially subscribe at earthmoverspodcast.substack.com. And now to chat with Katy. So I met Katy because I've participated in several Rainshadow Running events. Those events are some of the most difficult events I've ever done in my life, but so rewarding. It is a rare space in trail running where people are kind, people are encouraging, and super supportive. Also, fun fact, Katy makes the best gluten-free grilled cheese sandwich I've ever had. So with all of that, welcome Katy to Earth Movers.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So I'm going to read a bit from your bio so people get more information beyond just the, grilled cheese, which is the most important arguably. But Katy joined the Rainshadow staff in early 2020 and became a co-owner in 2023. She's been running ultras in the Northwest since 2014 and finds the woods and mountains to be a deep source of connection, healing, and creative inspiration. Katy's background as a performance artist and teacher is evidence in her passion for creating spaces for people to have connective and transformative experiences. I can see that. Aside from running, they also find joy in cooking for friends, making music, and being the cool aunt. All right, I want to start actually with your background as a performance artist and teacher. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so 20 years ago, I went to school at Cornish College of the Arts in Seattle, and I studied playwriting and directing for theater. And so it's interesting because I think of these live theater productions as having so much crossover with these events.
Yeah.
And the nature of all coming together in a live context to share an experience that just happens this one time that's informed by each other. It's very powerful. So I've always been, sort of interested in that. So I have that background. I've also done a number of different jobs over the last 15 years. But the latest, I actually got to go back and teach at Cornish. And I was teaching some acting classes and movement for artists as well.
Wow, I wouldn't immediately think of the connection between the two, but it makes so much sense, right? Like everything that you said about gathering people and also creating this sense of play, which I think is essential and often missing from these spaces, right? Like people get so locked in about performance and they forget that this is fun.
Yes, yes, totally.
Tell me about your start in trail running and how you made that connection.
Yeah. Well, I was a runner just for fun. I've lived in Seattle for most of the last 20 years,
Okay.
With a few exceptions. And when I was living in Seattle, I just got into running, honestly, mostly because I was walking to commute places. I'd be a little bit late. But if you just scoot your step up a little, or it's like, oh, I can make that bus if I run, And then it's like, wait, that actually kind of feels good. And somehow I just got into running, but I was running on sidewalks around Green Lake on the roads. And I was also a hiker, an avid hiker.
Okay.
And I never really crossed over the two, except maybe, you'd hike up somewhere. It's getting dark. Okay, I'll kind of run it out if I can. I didn't know that was a thing that people actually did, though. I mean, this was like, 2010-ish. And so then I remember reading about this word, ultra marathon. And I had never heard of this. And I was like, what the heck? And, did some Googling and was like, what is this? And then I looked, I was like, is this happening near me?
Wow.
And sure enough, it was like, oh, Capitol Peak, 55K is happening. And so I don't know why I got it in my head to sign up. It's my first organized race I ever participated in.
A 55K.
Yeah. And I wore my hiking boots.
Oh, I love that.
And a lot of cotton and a lot of mistakes were made, but it also hooked me. Yeah.
Okay, I love this story because I feel like with let me not say most, with many people who are race directors for trail ultra races, they have done this their whole life. It's sort of like a part of their DNA from the beginning. But I love that you knew nothing. You showed up in quote unquote the wrong clothing. And I'd love to know, how did that race go with those hiking boots and cotton?
It was, I probably blocked a lot of it out, but no, it was so hard, but it was also, I had never experienced anything like being surrounded by people who every time you see a person, they're like, way to go. And I see you. That thing was so powerful. All of that encouragement and being witnessed in that way. And I mean, I actually literally until 2017, for a few years, I continued running ultras, and I did not know a single other ultra runner who I would call a friend. And I would show up to these events, run my little run, put my backpack on and take off. And, so my experience for a while was very personal and very private, because I just wasn't really connected to other people doing this. And yet, within the context of that space, I felt deeply welcomed. And that weirdness was so appreciated.
Okay, I have so many questions, but I'm going to keep this train of thought. So how did you go from it being the personal to it being something more than that?
Well, I want to say that right around 2017, 2018, and so I wasn't working with Rainshadow at that point, but Rainshadow Running was a big part of this. My very first 100-mile finish was with Rainshadow Running at the Orcas 100 in 2018.
No way. Okay.
And that particular weekend and that particular experience and community was a next level of how I felt a certain sense of connection and belonging, and the ability to have these sort of long form and continuing conversations and connections over the course of multiple days with people. And so that took this to a next level for me, where something happened there. And I think it was that same feeling of like, if you're a musician and you go to just an amazing concert that changes your life, or it's like, this is what I want. Like this is where I want to be. This is what I want to be doing. This is powerful.
Wow. I just want to echo what you share about Rainshadow races, because when I did the Yakima 25K, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
I mean, I thought I was going to die. And I don't say that, like, I mean that truly. And to the point that it was so hard. And this might be TMI, but it happens. I had my period and I had a tampon in, and the tampon started coming out because of how difficult the hills were, or the mountains were to climb. And yet it was like the most encouraging group of people ever. And my mind almost couldn't handle these two opposing things. Like, this is so painful and I don't like it. But people are so kind. And then I finished, and then I went right back and did something even more difficult with you all last fall. So I totally it's a weird thing how
Mhm.
something so painful also can be so meaningful and
Yeah.
affirming at the same time.
Mhm. Mhm.
So you had this transformative experience at that race, and then you decided, I want to start directing races. How did you end up becoming a co-owner of Rainshadow?
Yeah. So I back in 2019. So James Varner, my co-owner, business partner, and dear friend,
Great,
he
great person.
was the sole owner at that time, and for a couple of years we dated. And during that time,
Stop.
yeah,
Oh
I
my
know
gosh.
it's been a few years since then, but
And
so
you
some
still
folks who
are
haven't
cool
known
with
me
each
that
other.
long, yes.
I love this. Okay.
So, and interestingly enough, we started dating at the end of 2019, which was very interesting time. So
Yes.
then COVID happened. And unfortunately, one of a huge bummer, of course, was that in 2020, when COVID happened, suddenly there was no trail running business. And James at that time had a staff of several people, both part-time and full-time folks, who then all were eventually laid off. And so that was a really challenging time for him, certainly, and for the business. It was really devastating for Rainshadow, of course, but just devastating for our country, for everybody affected. But I think it was that summer, Rainshadow hosted a virtual race. And then by 2021, it was like, okay, we can start to be putting on events again. And at that point, I was teaching online via Zoom, but I had a lot of spaciousness in my calendar and started helping out at the events. And pretty soon that became like all consuming. So 2021 and 2022, I was working for Rainshadow. And then there was just a certain point where I recognized, okay, this has the potential to be a full-time job, a full-time livelihood. Am I going to step away from my teaching position and my other work? And so it was clear to me too that I would only want to do that if I was able to engage in a more creative capacity. And have more ownership, literally and figuratively, of the business and the direction and like what kind of spaces we could be creating. And so that just happened very, very naturally. Yeah. So yeah.
Go on.
Please. Well, so yeah, I became a co-owner, actually starting at a sort of lower percentage rate in 2022, but then by 2023, I like fully bought in and was a 50% co-owner. So that was like a shift where I could start having more creative power in the company, so to speak.
And we've been talking a lot about Rainshadow Running. Can you tell me what is the mission statement or vision? Like, what is Rainshadow Running?
Yeah, so we put on trail runs in really what we truly epic and beautiful places, and often very difficult runs. A lot of our courses are known for featuring a lot of elevation gain, some really remote areas in some of them. These kind of mountainous regions or areas with a lot of wild, like truly wild factors. So that's what we're known for in terms of the events that we put on, but it's very much also geared around community and trying to create a space where people want to sit and hang out and cheer for each other and spend time together. We have a pizza truck usually at the finish line or some kind of like hot finish food for people, and try to really encourage everyone to take that time to gather and to connect and be cheering each other on. Yeah.
And before we go forward, I actually want to go way back because you are not from Seattle. So I want to ask, where are you from? And oh man, people in Seattle are going to be mad when I say this, but I feel like you must be from somewhere else because people from Seattle aren't known for being friendly and gathering. I mean, once you like hang with them, they certainly are. But initially, there's the freeze. So where are
Mhm.
you from? Where does this come from?
Well, oh gosh, I grew up in a military family. My father was an Air Force pilot,
Okay.
and so I was born in the Philippines, but that's not
Ah.
where I'm from. I lived there for 6 months, and then we moved around a lot. But I will say a big chunk of my childhood, 4 years, which was the longest I ever lived in one place during my childhood, was in Gulfport, Mississippi.
Oh, wow.
Deep South, yeah, and we were part of a Southern Baptist church, and I went to Southern Baptist school.
You are blowing my mind right now.
And also, I, as somebody who I'm a gender fluid queer person, and I have been very aware of those aspects of myself since childhood. And so, growing up as a queer person in Southern Baptist Gulfport, Mississippi has also informed a lot of my lens. But I will say one thing about living in the South, as so many issues and real difficulties. But there is also a kind of ease of saying hello and being friendly in a pretty genuine way. Now, this is like within communities that I've experienced of like white people being kind to other white people. But when you join this church or move into this neighborhood, people show up and they bring food and they immediately are like, how can we get you, your kids should play with my kids. And that was all so normalized in my life. That kind of speaking with each other, acknowledging who's around you, that all of that, I want to say is part of that sensibility that I come from. And I find it very difficult in Seattle as well at times. Like just the other day, going to a music concert by myself, and I was like just trying to smile at the people right next to me, like our shoulders are touching, and like they won't even look at me. They won't look me in the eye. They think it's weird that I just said hello. Now they're creeped out. It's hard. Yeah.
You saying that makes so much sense. And I would agree, right? Again, the South has so many problems. So does this entire country at this point. But within when I spent some time in Mississippi, Alabama with Black Voters Black Voters Matter a few years ago. And I was in mostly Black communities. But even within the Black community, there's just culturally, the South is more about connection and
Yes.
kindness in a way that, I mean, New York also I find is a place about connection and kindness and sarcasm and aggressiveness, right? But so I agree with you on that. And I remember, I think I had just run the Yakima 25K, and you reached out to me and you offered to babysit my son. And I didn't know you well, but that was such a kind gesture. And I knew you really meant it. And there were other reasons why it didn't work out. I lived like a million years from where you lived. But that was just like, that made such an impression on me because I had been in Seattle for a few years at that point, and nobody had offered that despite how hard it was to be a solo parent. So anyway, I really appreciate you. And where you grew up certainly has translated into how you take up space in this world.
Yeah. Yeah. And that example, like I want to embody that at our races for people as well, at our events, that, like making the grilled cheese sandwich, like, making food for somebody, doing this service, being in service and connection with people. Like, and I know James is the same way. Like I've always seen him as somebody who, if somebody meets him for the first time and they're moving that next weekend, he's going to be the first to show up with a truck, and I just had an event that was a Rainshadow event, or under the auspices of Rainshadow, but I literally invited people into my home, which is a little scary or a little risky, but that was the context of like, we're here to gather. And so, like that to me makes more sense. But of course, in this sort of culture and the Pacific Northwest culture, I understand that doesn't always translate for people.
Mm-hmm. Can we talk about the gathering that you just had? Because what I love about Rainshadow is that you operationalize your values, right? Like you say you're about certain things and then you take actions to put those things into place. And I think this meeting that you just had is one of several examples of how you are really intentional about creating warm and welcoming spaces. So tell me about it.
Yeah, so we hosted, I call it a thought-luck, but we've had a couple of these gatherings, and it's like a potluck, but for ideas. And these are specifically ideas about how we can support marginalized folks who are feeling, who are targeted by this administration on a number of different levels. So how do we support the most vulnerable people in our community? Who are they? How are we noticing them? How are we showing up? How does, and what are ideas for how we can create systems of support within this trail running community, which I think for a lot of us, when we think about community, is one of our primary communities that we think of.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I don't know that we're always equipped to function as a community in an authentic way. And I don't think I'm the perfect example of this either. This is just, I think something I'm grappling with and struggling with in how we, we call ourselves, we use that word community so much. And it's such a, hashtag community, hashtag trail culture. But what does that actually mean in practice with one another? Because it's all about people. So who are the people we're connecting with, and who are the people we're thinking of and speaking of? So how do we show up for that? I've gotten a bit off track here, but that essentially is the impetus behind the gathering, and to open up space for anybody who is feeling connected as a community, who wants to participate in that discourse and that dialogue, because I think we need more intentional discourse to move our community forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, speaking of, I was so pleasantly surprised to see, I believe I saw it via email, that Rainshadow is grappling with how do you create safety at your trail races when obviously you're running in the public and ICE can be anywhere and kidnap folks. And I was pleasantly surprised because I don't think I've seen any other race organization utter a single word about what's happening and the way that folks are impacted. So can you tell me more about, how you come to take these stances that are so important and honestly so obvious, but also not typical?
Thank you. Yeah, I think that to me that's the base. That should be the lowest bar. That's just the base. That seems obvious that we should be acknowledging these things, and I'm definitely not the paragon, the best example of how to be the most thoughtful and inclusive. I'm actively learning in real time, as we all are. But I think I don't understand how we can't acknowledge that these things are going on, because there's community members who are literally afraid to be outside, who rightfully are afraid to be outside, to be running at all, who don't have access to any of these resources because of state-sanctioned violence.
Mm-hmm.
If we're not acknowledging that, then I don't know who. It feels like it's shallow to call ourselves a community, because I think when we say community, we always have to be thinking, who are we really including in that statement? Who are the most vulnerable members of that community? Are we saying community, but we only mean white people? Are we saying community, but we only mean people who are currently safe, quote unquote, safe from this administration? So, for us, and also frankly grappling with, is it even, I struggled with, do we even host these events right now? It seems so trivial on one level, and even offensive to some folks who don't have this privilege and are seeing this sort of privilege that many of us do have of being able to run these events right now and do these things, holding all of that. That's certainly been a consideration as well. And yet there's also another side of that, of like how important it is to be connecting in person right now. And in fact, I think that's where some of the most important connections and strategic support are happening. It's not just, what is being shared on the internet. There's types of support that we need to keep off of the internet for safety reasons, But anyways, I do think it's actually absurd to me to think that we aren't talking about it more. But I do think that so many race companies and companies in general, businesses, are struggling with, are we a business first or a community first? And like, which value are we really going to fall back on when push comes to shove? And I think this is one of those moments, because I will say it's very bad for business on some levels,
Right. Yeah. It would be easier and maybe more fiscally responsible to keep your mouth shut. I want to actually give a shout out here to Ultra, who is a brand and company that puts support behind conversations and communities like Earth Movers and other Black and Brown trail organizations. To your point, I think particularly in this time, to have the support of a brand like Ultra really does sort of speak to their values and what's important to them. So shout out to Ultra. I want to go back to what you said, though, because what I love about your conversation around community is that, we often hear trail running community, but that community doesn't extend beyond like the race, right? It doesn't actually then exist anywhere else. In fact, when you say things within that community that are political or that somebody deems are not appropriate, then suddenly you're ostracized from community. And I saw this very explicitly when you had a conversation on Instagram around gender and gender identity. And I want to ask you to share that here, and then we can dig into that.
Yeah. So a lot of what I've shared is a noticing of how many of our events are still fundamentally built in ways that are trans exclusionary. Even as we make certain moves to be more inclusive of, say, non-binary athletes or trans athletes in these different ways. What I see is that fundamentally our structures, our systems, and the ways that we invite people in the door are still fundamentally trans exclusive. And then you get this argument that like, oh, well, there aren't even enough trans people for it to matter. We don't need,
Right.
And it's like, which is, very telling in many ways. Like, I personally, my community, like I'm in community with many trans people. Like this is part of our like daily life of like dealing with what's going on in the world and understanding it. I have a friend who just moved to Barcelona in November because she doesn't feel safe here as a trans woman. I was in the ER with a trans friend several months ago because they were getting themselves mental health help because it's the impact of what's happening is so profound. But I think a lot of people don't understand that, especially if you're not in community with trans and or non-binary people. And so, I feel very passionate about moving our spaces forward in terms of what real gender equity looks like. and that we need to be critical thinkers about that, and not just, especially as race organizers, I think, whether we like it or not, we're taking on a certain mantle of leadership. And so I think it's important that we not just be followers and just do what everybody else is doing because that's what they're doing and that's how it's always been. I think we need to think critically about the spaces that we're creating, the messages we're sending with our rhetoric and with the way that we invite people into the door and the experiences they have. So those are some things that I've been very vocal about. And certainly anytime that you're vocal about trans inclusivity on the internet, there's going to be a lot of blowback. That's part of the reality of the state of affairs.
How do you manage that blowback? Because, I've also said, quote unquote, controversial things that are not actually controversial
Right.
and have gotten a lot of blowback. So I'm curious, how do you manage that?
Yeah. Well, I just love what you just said. Like, they're not actually controversial. Like, like when you just ask for basic equity, it's like somehow radical, on a lot of these different levels. With that blowback, it's, when there's a lot of people who want to engage, they may disagree with me or not be all there, or have be all there in terms of having gone along towards the logical conclusion of an argument, or just have a different perspective. And if they're being respectful and thoughtful, then I feel very happy to the extent of my interest and bandwidth to engage with that. But there's a lot of the blowback that comes in the form of abuse, of just abusive vitriol, of, threats. Somebody made somebody who's like a transphobic YouTuber personality made a whole video about me and put me on blast to their community of other transphobic folks, so you have that's a new worry. Am I, going to be doxxed? I get these weird messages that are very hateful. Mostly I deal with it by being grounded in where I'm coming from, and knowing what I stand for and feeling connected to my values and being grounded in that. But it would be disingenuous to say that stuff doesn't scare me, doesn't get to me, that it doesn't hurt my heart to read some of this stuff. And it's very painful. Sometimes the most painful are the folks that you think are, as I'm sure you understand well, like the folks you think are allies. And then there are these moments where it's revealed that actually underneath that, there's still that deep attachment to white supremacy, to patriarchy, to these systems. And that, I think that's a really painful reckoning that we're having within this trail running community right now, of like, that we've always thought of ourselves as so inclusive, but we're the good white people,
Right. That actually made me think of something with just tangentially related, but in this time, many people are referring to what's happening. They're referring to this administration as Nazis. And I forget who made this commentary, but it's like, no, in this country, white people have been just like Nazis in other countries, right? There were good white people who were allies, and then there were white people who were upholding systems of oppression and benefiting from racism. And so it's the point I'm making here is that oftentimes we like to see ourselves as compared to other people as better or somehow more evolved, when fascism is not new in this country, right? It's just now taken on even wider dimensions, and even uglier ways. Well, not even uglier, continued ugly ways.
Yeah.
I want to go back to something you said a couple of times, this idea of witnessing. And I wonder where that language comes from, because I often think about bearing witness, and it's so powerful. So I'm wondering, where does that come from for you?
Yeah. To me, I guess it's something about what that power is, of like when we feel really seen by somebody, what a deeply human need that is, and what a deeply healing thing it can be. And also, to witness something, it implies a being with truth. It's kind of like sometimes somebody will say something and it's so truthful. They really hit the nail on the head, and your whole body just kind of relaxes because you're like, yep. Being with that, we're being in truth with one another, being seen by one another, I think is a fundamental, like, connective tissue of belonging, and just this deeply human, beautiful, messy thing, this need that we all have, the way we're wired. It really speaks to that. And I think so many people, that is one of the most beneficial things about getting to participate in these sports, is that sense of belonging and being witnessed.
Right.
But I think a lot of us don't realize that not everybody gets to have that experience.
Right.
That many people are not being seen, and in fact that we're requiring people to diminish themselves or present as a certain version of themselves in order to participate.
You are dropping so much truth right now. I just had that moment of like, yes. And, to your point, right? I know that as a Black woman, this sense of hypervisibility, like when I'm the only in the room, I know people are seeing me, but then coupled with an invisibility.
Yes.
Going back to this conversation around trans and non-binary inclusion, how have you built these, or how are you working to build your values into policies at Rainshadow Running? Like, what does that mean when folks are showing up for your events?
Yeah. So one of the ways that one thing that we've done that has not been great for business, but is a value-based decision, is not being on Ultra Sign Up anymore. And so originally, Ultra Sign Up several years ago was not willing to offer any non-binary division at all.
Wow.
And that has now changed. However, as somebody who signed up under the non-binary category, there's actually a lot of barriers along the way that kind of force you to misgender yourself, that it's still not there. The other thing about Ultra Sign Up, so another life I've lived was I worked for a few years as an advocate case manager for victims of domestic violence. And so having that understanding also has informed a lot of where I'm coming from. But one aspect of it in regards to Ultra Sign Up is the privacy factor. Ultra Sign Up at that time also did not give the option for folks to opt out of entrance lists, for example. Now there is an option now on Ultra Sign Up where you can basically black out all of your results, even to yourself. So you can't even see what you're signed up for if you take this option. So it's kind of, but there is a type of option. But anyway, so for me, it was really important to grapple with those things of how we're inviting people in terms of gender identity and in terms of privacy. And so one way that we do that with WebScore, and it's not a perfect system, it's kind of clunky. You have to fill out a million questions. But some of the questions that we ask people, like for gender, we give people the option to just not disclose. You can prefer not to say. Otherwise, it's a write-in because non-binary as a catch-all does not resonate with everybody who is gender variant or gender expansive in some way. So people can write in, I'm agender, I'm gender fluid, I prefer not to say, whatever it might be. And they also write in their pronouns. And again, all of this is optional. So people can opt out of answering these questions. And then we also ask people both if they are wanting to be displayed on an entrance list and if they want to be eligible for prizes if we offer them. Now, we are not a prize heavy company, so oftentimes we just don't even do prizes. But if we do, and those are based on gender, then we'll offer them to every gender that has signed up. However, I know that there are some runners, myself included, who, if you're the only non-binary person in a category, you may not want to be given that attention, that prize by default, those sorts of things. That I think that should be an individual's decision. And so basically we've built that in order to give people the most agency over their experience, what they want to share, how they want to share it, and their privacy. And so that's how we do it. And one reason why we've moved away from ultra sign up in the process.
Katy, everything you said makes a clear case for why people who are race directors should not spend their entire life in the trail running community.
Yes.
Why it's valuable to have experiences outside of trail running to inform what you're doing. I remember being so thankful about that option regarding privacy about where I lived, because at the time I lived in a place that was a small town here in Washington, and I felt hypervisible and honestly was concerned. It's not such a big place that you could find like one of very few Black families. So to be able to just say that I was from Seattle was so helpful. So yeah, I mean, I think everybody in the world, but especially in this country, should have to take sociology, anthropology, a mental health course, right? Like all of these things so that you can just be a better human and consider other
Yes.
people's. So anyway, I'm making a case for like Running USA, all those organizations. Katy should be leading sessions on how to truly build inclusive, not perfect, right? But working towards inclusive communities, right? That's because the things that you are attentive to are rare in a lot of spaces.
Which is such a shame. Again, like it should be. I wish more of our spaces were truly trauma informed, and also, I think we need to do a lot of work to pull back the veil over our own eyes on how white supremacy and misogyny is showing up in the trail culture, is embedded within what we see as trail culture. And like, I think, especially if we want to take on a mantle of leadership as race directors, yes, I agree. I think people, should verse themselves in some like basic gender theory, in some understanding racial dynamics and, misogynoir and how other forms of racialized misogyny show up in the space. I mean, there's so much. We live in a time when, you can read Moya Bailey, Sabrina Strings, Talia May Betcher, these like brilliant, intellectuals. Their work is there, like available to us to tangle with. Like, there's no reason to not follow these arguments and these thoughts to their logical conclusion. I think we're just all so afraid of discomfort, of what it would mean if we really make ourselves vulnerable to some of those changes. Yeah.
Wow. Yes. Gems everywhere. I'm going to make a hard pivot. I'm going to go hard left and ask you, what are you most excited about with Rainshadow Running? Like, yeah, let me not qualify it any more than that. What are you most excited about?
Well, I really feel like, as we have been more clear and more vocal about what our values are and what values we want to be guiding us and shaping the community experiences, so many more connections are arising and a lot more people are showing up who are feeling safe to be in these spaces. That to me is really exciting. I guess I want to say, on the tip of my tongue is this idea of like matriarchal leadership. Like, this is something that why I think, like, particularly you, Alison, and Verna, like, I look up to you so much. How much you get the intersection of of white supremacy and misogyny and ableism, and how it's showing up in our communities. Like, I'm really moved by, there's a lot of matriarchal community leadership happening in a lot of different ways, inside and outside of the trail running community. Like, I'm thinking right now of some matriarchal leaders within the Lummi Nation who are doing just incredible work around protecting natural spaces and being in their truth, and what a powerful impact that's having on the environment and what's possible. So I'm excited for that, and I'm also excited for the unknown, because I do actually think that there's some ways in which leaning into this connectivity means that you're not in control of the outcome, and being okay, and actually being willing to go on that journey and put yourself in that river and move down it,
Oh my God, you just like described my life with that, because that is, I mean, I have a lot of privilege, I have a lot of education, there are things that certainly have informed me getting to this place, and possibilities just come from everywhere because of the connections that I've made, right? One of them is this podcast where I've put out so much good energy. It's been returned to me that I reach out to Verna and Steph and Cherie, and we make a podcast, right? Like, and yeah, I've never really put it into words in the way that you said, but and it's not about karma. It's not about things coming back to me. It's just that like connections are made, and from those connections, then you build more spaces for people like you, right? I love that. Well, I feel like we've already discussed this question in so many different ways, but I want to ask explicitly, what does being an earth mover mean to you?
To me, I think about the literal idea of earth moving, like what we do has an impact. Whatever we do, whatever choices we make in the way that we walk upon the earth has an impact. And so being intentional and responsible about what that impact is, I think being connected to those values, and letting those values guide the imprint is what being an earth mover means to me.
Wow. Are you teaching any classes soon? Like, because I need like more of this in my life. Seriously, Katy, is there anything, what's coming up for you personally?
One thing that I am, it's not a class, but that I am organizing right now is just getting some other race directors, run leaders together for kind of a race director thought-luck about how we can be showing up for our community members at this time, and what that looks like, particularly in regards to ICE, but also these, what are we doing in terms of these, like the more long-term work, certainly acknowledging this moment, but that this is part of a long history and frankly, a lot of work ahead. But I think I've been hearing from more race directors and leaders that they're interested in having those conversations and hearing more about that. So I think being more intentional in that way is one small step towards that. So that's that, and I've got some other things percolating, for sure, some different ideas about ways to try to kind of move things forward. But so much of it too is about relationship. Everything happens through relationships. So some of it's a slow burn of showing up and opening yourself up to building those relationships in a way that you are not in control of, so that's where I'm at right now.
Wow. Okay. Where can people follow you, follow Rainshadow? Where can people get more information about the things that you mentioned?
Yeah, well, we are on Instagram and Facebook at Rainshadow Running. I'm on Instagram under Katy A. Farrell, and you're welcome to follow me there if you're interested. But really, Rainshadow is the primary source for that trail running related work and sort of community related work. Our website is rainshadowrunning.com, and we host events all throughout the year in the Northwest. And so would also love to see folks in person. If you ever want to come join us, I'd love that.
Yeah, I'm thinking just this morning, I was like, what race do I want to suffer through? Let me go check out what Rainshadow has going on, because there's going to be some bomb grilled cheese. There's going to be kind people. So, and I want to share this quote. So I have a PBS show, and one of the people who I most recently got to profile is they are I don't want to do them in an injustice, but they are in the circus, and they're in the circus arts. And what they share is that for them, good art leaves you feeling anxious to go out and create. And that is this conversation. Like, it gives me anxiety in a good way. I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I need to connect. I need to do stuff. So thank you so much for that feeling. And I hope everybody listening has that same feeling. Thank you to Ultra Running, of course, for supporting our show. If you want more, you can find us on Substack now, earthmoverspodcast.substack.com. Of course, like, share, review, all the things so we can get in front of more people who need to be hearing these kinds of conversations. Thank you so much, Katy.
Thank you.